This is Generation Space, the official podcast of Air Force Space Command. In this episode, the future is now. We may not be able to travel through time, but we brought in two experts who are doing the next best thing. Welcome to Space Futures.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is MSgt David Salanitri, and welcome to another episode of Generation Space. Today, I have two very special guests here with me, both big brains, but they're going to try to keep it, so this Jersey-educated individual can understand what we're talking about. So we're going to talk about space futures. So, sir, thank you for being here. Why don't you introduce yourself to everybody?
Well, yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I'm Les Johnson. I work for NASA at the Marshall Space Flight Center, which is in Huntsville, Alabama. I am the principal investigator, which means the lead scientist for NASA's first interplanetary solar sail propulsion system. And I can probably explain what that is in a little bit. But basically, it's pretty exciting. It's a new technology for space propulsion, and we'll be flying next year, taking a small spacecraft to an asteroid.
That's awesome. I'm glad we have you now because I know next year, everyone's going to probably want to have you on their show. So I feel like, this is great. This is the precursor.
Well, people get interested in this kind of thing, so I hope there's a lot of interest in it. Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Now, sitting to my left, Doctor, if you...
Hi, I'm Joel Mozer. I'm the Chief Scientist at Air Force Space Command. I have one of the coolest jobs in the world. It's a great place, so I get to provide science and technology advice to the command and to the general. Think about the future and do all kinds of futurist stuff.
Well, one of the things that I just love about that is when I talk to my friends outside of space who are at like ACC or whatever other major command, I ask them like, your MAGCOM's cool, but do you have a chief scientist?
That's right.
I feel like that's probably one of the cooler business cards.
It's
Granted,
cool.
your business card's pretty cool. I don't know if you have enough real estate, size 8-point font to fit all that.
Well, I have to tell you, the coolest business card I've ever had was about 15 years ago, where I was managing NASA's interstellar propulsion technology research. We were looking at how you send a probe beyond the edge of the solar system. And so when I was in bragging rights about cool business cards, that's one I kept. That was one of the coolest titles I've had.
Frame it, put it on the coffee shop or coffee table. Cool. So I know one of the things that I'm really excited for us to speak about is the space, the future of space and the projects and the things that we're doing, not just, I guess, in the Air Force, but, the MAGCOM and DoD-wide and I guess really nationwide. So I'll just say when I think about space, one of the coolest things that I think about is possibilities and that there is no ceiling. What's the phrase? The sky's the limit. Well, not for us.
Not anymore, right?
Infinity and beyond. That's right.
So, what are we doing? What are some of the steps that we're doing here to kind of really look out, not just today, the problems of today and tomorrow, but long term?
Well, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of change happening in space, a lot of exciting times. We're really seeing a lot of new developments that we haven't seen in many years. A lot of us grew up at the time of the first space race and the space age, and I think we're about to launch off onto the next space age where we really got our foot on the clutch, about to shift gears and move forward. So there's a lot to think about, a lot of changes coming our way in the next 10, 20, 30 years. A lot of that's being driven by the government, such as Les and I, but also a lot of it being driven by industry and just new developments in rocket propulsion and satellite technology. So very exciting times.
That is, and I know, if we look at, our near peer competitors, they're doing a lot right now. Are we trying to, so what's our 20, 30 year, what's the goal?
Well, yes. So that's we just recently had a workshop here in Colorado Springs to talk about just that thing. We set our sights on 60 years from now. So the whole idea of that was not to be able to predict the future that far in advance, but to get us out of short-term thinking, to really think on the long term and what is our role and what is the United States' role in developing space over the next 6 decades. And that our strategic competitors have long views as well. They're thinking about all of the advantages that space can bring to them. They realize that the U.S. right now is very dominant in space. We developed a lot of that technology, and they would like to take advantage of that and grow technology themselves. So, we have a long-term plan to think about how we're going to expand our operations in low Earth orbit, near Earth, things close to home, as well as moving out further out to the moon and even Mars, and thinking about what would that look like in terms of technology? What's the role of the government? What's the role of the Department of Defense as we expand out to the moon? How do we set up that infrastructure and a lot of that, the norms of behavior? Those are all things that we need to be concerned about and work towards.
Now, am I somewhat accurate when I say that a foundational element of that is not just the people who are in this room or in this building or in this, who are living right now, but I mean, it's someone who's about to, who's a toddler right now. It's our STEM audience. Is that, I know I've heard one of your videos, you talk about the next generation. What are your thoughts when you think of all the things we want to accomplish, and then we think about the person, the intellectual? Are we growing that next crop, or what can we do to get the next generation excited?
Well, I think we're doing everything we could be doing to get that generation excited. I look at this as kind of an echo of Apollo that we're going through now. Joel and I was 7 years old when Neil Armstrong walked on the moon in a little footy pajamas, watching it on black and white TV, right? And that's when I decided I wanted to work for NASA and be involved in space exploration. But I wasn't alone. You've got a generation of leaders at NASA in military space, and probably most significantly that people have been hearing about in commercial space, who were also of that generation and are now able to do something about it. And so I think we're in a window, which was kind of the echo of the boom of the 60s, where you have people who were children then who are now in positions where they're able to do something to further the dream they had when they were children. And I think that kind of inspiration is going to continue into the future. At least I hope it does. But this is a real opportunity we have. And I think if we seize it and we're successful and we move the human economic sphere beyond the Earth and to low Earth orbit to the moon and beyond, that'll inspire generations all over the world.
Yeah, when I think about the next generation, I think about military generation. So General J. Raymond, our boss, was commissioned in 1985. That was 34 years ago.
I was not alive.
He and I are roughly the same age. So a lot has changed since then, including you.
You're welcome, America.
Yeah, absolutely. But think back in 1985, the internet wasn't a thing then. The NSF net was just connecting a few universities across the country. The most technologically advanced personal computer was the Apple Macintosh. And since that time, there's been a lot of changes. We fought the first Gulf War, where we really demonstrated that space can play a role in warfighting in terms of precision engagement and getting communications and video back from the field. And we've developed remotely piloted vehicles. There's been a lot of change. So I think about the folks who are being commissioned now. In 34 years, the next space general is a second lieutenant, becoming a second lieutenant now. So by 2053, there's going to be a lot of changes between now and there, and that's going to be an exciting career for anybody that wants to take that ride. And it's going to be accelerated too. So we think there's a lot of changes since 1985. We haven't seen anything yet. So
yeah, and I think one of the things that gets me amped up right now is the fact that, right now we're not launching our U.S. astronauts out of America, but that's about to change. I mean, does that, I think about the 7-year-old who's in footy pajamas, who's about to see, Air Force astronauts or NASA astronauts, whatever, go up to space from American soil. Is that not a pivotal?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's been a moment we've been working towards since the retirement of the shuttle fleet. And from a civil space point of view, sending people back to the space station on our own vehicles, it's great. But what it's going to enable is, in my opinion, what it's going to take for us to become a spacefaring species. And that is for more than just government astronauts to go to space. I think we're going to see these same spin-off technologies take first fairly wealthy tourists, right? Let's acknowledge that. But I think to build that infrastructure in space, slowly but surely, we're going to open it up to more people. And once we do that, it'll enable it for everybody. And the dream that the young person has of going to space won't be the equivalent of winning the lottery. It'll be something that they might actually have a realistic chance of achieving. I mean, and that's great.
That's exciting stuff, because I think about I think about where we've been the last 10 years or so, and all of a sudden I feel like the last year or two, we're reusable rockets. There's a lot that's going on. Is it safe to say, let's say we were plateauing, is this spiking back up?
Absolutely, you hit right on it. since the beginning of the space age, one of the problems with space is the cost of getting there. A rocket launch can be $100 million or more. So we've been very cautious about launching rockets. We put a lot of capability into single satellites, and we have $1 billion satellites launching $100 million launches. But that's changing with all of this work with reusable launches. The cost is going down dramatically, and at the same time, the capability of satellites with all the microelectronics revelations and things becoming smaller and more capable, it's really opening up a whole new era for us, and that's kind of why we're going to see a very big change. We've been held back for a long time because space is just plain hard, but it's getting a little easier.
A little bit, yeah. Well, like one of the things that sometimes when I talk to my friends or even my parents or whoever it may be, and I talk to them about the importance of what we're doing as DoD space or space as a whole within the nation, sometimes they have a hard time kind of understanding, well, why do we need increased focus? Like my cell phone works. When I use my credit card, I can get money out of the ATM or whatever it may be. Life's good. Why do I need? What needs to change? What needs to change? What do you say to that kind of person?
Well, I guess I would say to that kind of person, and I interact with a lot of people who have similar questions, is before we went to space and built communication satellites that give you cable television and GPS that gives you precise navigation, the average person on the street would not have said, oh, I need something I can hold in my hand to give me precision navigation to get from point A to point B. They wouldn't have thought of that. And I think what will happen as we extend ourselves into space even further is people are going to innovate, and that will definitely impact our lives in positive ways. Space today, people talk about commercial space. Space has been commercial for 50 years. I mean, there are billions of dollars being made in space right now by private companies launching things to space, operating communication satellites in space, building hardware that's put into space. It's a part of our lives. And I think as we expand further and get more and more people out there, that kind of answer will become more obvious. For me, my vision is we start relying on space to help solve problems here on Earth. I'd like to see us putting power stations in space so that we can beam clean energy to anywhere on the planet with space solar power stations. I think monitoring the climate, monitoring the impact of people on the planet from space helps us be better planners. So it impacts our lives in many ways, and we can do a lot more.
Ways we haven't even really thought of.
Ways we haven't even thought of.
Yeah, let's hit on it. The current space economy is estimated to be about $300 billion a year. Folks are projecting that by the 2030s or 2040, it'll be 100 times that much, $3 trillion a year. So that's a lot of growth in commercial endeavors and in industry. And what's going to make that possible and what's going to keep us there is if industry finds wealth streams, new ways to make money in space, because that'll keep us going. Back in the Apollo days when we went to the moon, that was great, and we were motivated mostly by political concerns. We wanted to go there to beat the Russians at the Cold War. It was great, made a lot of progress. Unfortunately, once we planted that flag and sort of won that race, it wasn't sustainable, so we didn't keep going. So in order for developing space to become sustainable, there really has to be a business reason for going back there. And there's lots of opportunity. The wealth of space is virtually unlimited in terms of the services that can be provided and the things that can be done. So that's really what's going to drive the next generation.
And I think sustained presence is very important. I mean, NASA's plans now are to return to the moon and not have it be a flags and footprints, have it be a sustained human presence on the moon. But once you do that, you have to ask the question, how are they going to get food? How are they going to get water? How are they going to be resupplied? And that can all be done commercially, economically. And as you do that, it's like anything else. You're building an infrastructure. When you establish here in Colorado, right? When Colorado was settled, you had people who came out here to do whatever. And then in order to support them, other people had to come to provide the goods and services that they needed to survive, and you grew an economy. And now that we have more affordable launch, I really see the same thing happening in space. As we establish people beyond low Earth orbit, there will have to be an economy that follows them, and it'll be a self-perpetuating thing.
Wow. Now, so think about, we're talking about the future, and you just had this great conference not long ago that talked about, I think it's called the Space Futures. What were some of the big things that that really, when you left that conference, that got you amped up, that got you excited? What was that one or two things?
Yeah, so we had a lot of smart people come together and think about what the future might be like. We looked at current trends across not only technology, but politics and economics and demographics and all of those things, and tried to extrapolate those into the future. As I said, we were trying to look 60 years in advance. And a lot of ideas about this big ramp up to the next space age. But we really kind of came down to ask ourselves three questions. And one of them is what we just talked about. Is there new money to be made in space? Are there well streams? Is there revenue that can keep us there sustainably? That's question one. The second one, will people live in large numbers in space? Right now, there's 6 people that live in space. They're on the International Space Station. A lot of people like Jeff Bezos talk about moving heavy industry into space and having lots and lots of people living in near-Earth space. So we could see thousands of people, irrespective of living on the moon or Mars, which could really bring a lot of people. So that was question 2, will there be a lot of people in space? And the third one, which is really telling, is will Western influences really lead that space? Will we set the norms of behavior? Will we maintain the liberal international order that we enjoy in the Western world on Earth? Will that propagate into space? And so those 3 questions, if you kind of think about them as yes/no questions, yes or no, there'll be money, yes or no, we'll have lots of people living in space, and yes or no, Western influences will lead it. That's 2 times 2 times 2 is 8 different futures. And you can kind of think about that on your own. So if you think about where all those 3 questions are yes, there's money, yes, there's people, and yes, there's a Western leadership, we call that the Star Trek future. That's really the future we like to live in. That's the one.
Don't get me excited like that.
That's right. But there's 7 others that you can think about, and many of those are not so bright for us, and we need to think about those kind of futures. We need to have them in mind as we make our decisions today and when we invest in things and we make decisions, so that we aim towards the futures that we like and not towards the ones that we want to discourage. So that's kind of the big thing that came out of that workshop.
So did you end it optimistic, pessimistic, somewhere in between?
I think it's very optimistic. I think a big part of that is just having awareness of those potential futures. You need to, if there is going to be a lot of new commerce in space, a lot of new people, we need to think about what is the role of the Department of Defense. Will we be there to protect that money and those people? Is that an expanded mission for us? And from a NASA perspective, how are we going to work together as a whole of government to make sure that this all plays out well from the perspective of national power? So.
What gets you excited, sir?
Oh, everything about space gets me excited. I'm a longtime science fiction fan. I love the thought of an optimistic future. The Star Trek future certainly inspires me. No, I'm excited all around. Like I say, I really believe that we have an opportunity window of probably another 15 to 25 years, while the generation that saw Apollo as youth and are now in leadership positions can really make a difference and make things happen. And I think they are at all fronts. I think it's happening for NASA in the civil space. I think it's happening on military space, and it's certainly happening in commercial space. So of all those futures, the one I want to see is, of course, the Star Trek future, but I would definitely err on the side of optimism. This is the most exciting time in my space career, and you can tell I've been at it a while, and I'm bullish. I think we have to get the culture aware of that optimism, though. One of the things that has struck me over the last several years is the plethora of dystopic futures that are in science fiction films and in movies, and particularly in the literature consumed by young people. When I was younger, I was reading optimistic books about our future, things that we could do in space and that we would be doing in space. And it seems like for the last 20 years or so, we've been on this dystopic kick about how awful the future is going to be. And that doesn't agree with history. I mean, this is the best time for a human being to ever be on planet Earth. People are living freer and more prosperous than ever before. And we have that opportunity to extend that and to sustain that. And we should take it. We shouldn't be scared of it.
So like those kids who are reading those books and consuming that kind of information that's that's very different than what you grew up with.
Yeah.
What if you had one sitting right next to you right now, what would you say to get them amped up?
I would get them amped up just saying, look around you at what we're doing and look what you can do. I mean, you have the opportunity to be a part of making this better future. And don't let people tell you that tomorrow is going to be worse than today, because that disagrees with most of the last several hundred years of history. I mean, there are ups and downs, and there are good points and bad points. We've had our setbacks, but in general, it's been a positive movement. And I think there's no reason to expect that to end if we have that as our mindset and we're optimistic about it. So that young person, I would say, whatever field you're interested in, I'm biased toward physics as a physicist, right? Physics, engineering, but it doesn't have to be just science. I think if we're going to make this a sustainable future, we need to bring everybody with us. We've got to bring the accountants, the lawyers, we've got to bring the artists. We have to have all of those people engaged. And that's when we know we've hit a cultural moment and we're going to make it happen. If it just is the scientists and engineers who are the people enabling the technologies, it may be a one-off, or we may do something fun here or there, or something really meaningful here or there, but it won't be the expansion we need. We need to get the culture moving with us, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. We alluded to it earlier. Space is a little bit like the Wild West. We're expanding out there. We're doing a lot of really cool stuff, but if we're not careful, we could find ourselves at some inflection points that go the wrong direction. So we need to be on top of that. So we need people like lawyers and policy folks that can set the conditions for this future space that are positive for us. We need certainly the scientists and engineers to develop that. But it's very important that since we're embarking off on this new future, that we think through the consequences of the decisions that we're making today, and that we make very positive decisions for that future. A lot of it is going to be along the lines of what's the infrastructure like. It's like building highways in space. The government needs to be involved in that, in developing a lot of that infrastructure so that we promote the best uses of space for commerce. Back to 1985, the internet didn't exist yet. But since that time, it's grown to huge, it's a big fraction of the global domestic product now. I think there's $1 million spent online every minute. A lot, but there's also a lot of cyber crime, and there's cyber warfare. So 30 years ago, if we had thought through some of the implications of that and put in the conditions to make sure that we had secure and protected internet communications, we could have beat a lot of that down. So for space, we need to do the same thing. We need to think through what the future could be like and establish a lot of the policies and technology and regulations today that make sure that the good things happen in the future.
And I think that's important too, because it's not just what we do in terms of the building the infrastructure, it's the legal and economic, the tax code, the FAA and how they certify launches for this, that, or whoever does the certification. I think the whole government needs to be involved in this so that we don't get out of balance in terms of what our expectations are and what we can actually accommodate.
And it's something I just discovered the last couple of years. All of a sudden, coming into this MAGCOM, is it seems like the narrative on space has changed. Where there was the last 10 years, the narrative pretty much just didn't exist. But all of a sudden, the last couple of years, we're actually starting to hear some of those conversations take place. Is that one of the things that kind of gets you optimistic, or do you think hey, yeah, these conversations are occurring, but not at the rate of which they should be, or I don't want to put too much into a box here, but
no, I think it's happening at the right pace. There was legislation that passed the U.S. government a couple of years ago to help facilitate this notion of asteroid mining in space by American companies, so that they could actually keep the profits that come from that. And I think if we're going to be successful, there has to be a profit motive in there, right? People have to be able to make a living or make a profit in doing it. I've got several acquaintances who are in this other part of the culture, the philosophers. There's a philosopher at Wichita State University who regularly hosts discussions about the ethics of what we're doing and trying to bring the ethicists along with that. So I think it's infectious, and I think we've had an inflection point, and we're going the right direction, and we just got to build on that momentum. And I see it everywhere.
One of the things that kind of gets me excited is I can, I've been here for about 3 years now, and from when I started and to where I am now, it's getting to the point where I can actually talk about space with my friends who are, realtors or home loan officers, and we can have a great conversation about space and where we're going. It's to the point where everyone seems that they're excited about it. I was at a pub the other day talking to one of Colorado's many hipsters, of course, and all of a sudden we were able to have a great conversation about commercial space. And then I kind of segued into, we have a guy who wears the same uniform as I do up in space right now. His name is Colonel Nick Hague. And I don't know, like a couple years ago if that existed, but then I think about where my parents were when they were kids, and I feel like that was just par for the course. That was happening all the time. So it seems like there's this excitement that's growing. You talked about this philosopher who's talking about ethics, and is that pretty accurate? Where it's kind of it's starting to build again, or was I just in a box before I came here, possibly?
Maybe a little bit of both.
Okay,
actually.
That's fair.
I think if you don't have, I live in a space community, and so we talk about it all the time. But I go out and give talks. I go to science fiction conventions. Yes, I don't wear pointy ears or anything, but I do go and these conventions, and I love talking to science fiction fans. And one of the things I find is that there is a lot of interest out there, but they're starved for information. They don't have the people who are knowledgeable or working in the field at ready access to have conversations in a pub or to have a conversation over dinner, and they're just eager to hear. And it's not necessarily making the news, because right now we're in this, I call it a pessimistic news cycle, where it's only the outrage that makes the news, right? And if it's something successful and positive, it might get a short mention and then it's done. But when you're out talking, or I'm out talking, and we're with people that are outside our little bubble, I think people are tremendously excited because they want to hear more and they want to be positive about the future. Yeah.
And one of the exciting things that's happening right now is we have these big industrialists who like Les and I, grew up in the age of thinking we were on the verge of great things in space, but largely a lot of those didn't happen. But now we have people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and Richard Branson who are using their own money to see this vision through. And I think that's getting a lot of people very excited. Every time there's a new SpaceX launch, there's lots of people watching, very, very excited about that, and I'm very pleased that that's happening. But we have to take advantage of that while we can. These folks aren't going to be around forever, and they're fueling this next generation. We have a window of opportunity to use their enthusiasm and their investments to make great things happen. So.
I want to interject something else too,
please.
because I think this optimism and positive futures is coming from science. Because with the discovery of planets around other stars, and it making the news, we find planets that might be in that region from the star where it could support life like we have here on Earth. Up until 1982-ish, there was no confirmation that any planets existed outside our solar system. Now, science fiction fans knew they existed, right, because they were in the books and in the movies, but there was no hardcore science evidence. Now we found thousands of them, and we're finding hundreds every year to add to that list. And so when you start looking in space and you find out that there may be other worlds like ours out there that really exist, that we're getting data about, people start asking, well, how are we going to get there? Well, that's really hard. And it's not something we're going to be able to do now, although people like me are working on technologies that I think can evolve to let us do that. But this whole notion of expanding beyond Earth is a necessary first step to ever achieve that Star Trek future. We can't go from being an earthbound culture to exploring the universe. We've got to do it incrementally and with forethought, as Joel mentioned earlier. And I think that getting kids excited and getting other people excited is one day I think we want to send, or our children, to send robotic probes and eventually people to some of these other stars. But in order to do that, we have to basically become inhabitants of our own solar system and learn how to live and work in space. So it's all a first step.
That's it for part 1 of our conversation on space futures. We'll continue in the next episode, so stay with us. Thanks for joining us, and don't forget to leave a comment because we want your suggestions on future topics. Also, please help us get the word out by sharing Generation Space with your friends, family, and colleagues. Generation Space is a production of Air Force Space Command Public Affairs. The Generation Space theme is by First Lieutenant Tyler Whiting. Our audio engineer is Jacob Mosolf. Our video producers are Staff Sergeant J.T. Armstrong and Dave Grimm, and our producer is Second Lieutenant Kristen Shimkus. For more info on Air Force Space Command, please visit our website at www.afspc.af.mil. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks for supporting the airmen who aim higher. They used to say the sky's the limit, but for us in space, there is no limit.